Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, SSDs in your network-attached storage? Maybe. We'll share our thoughts. 2 million passwords are leaked, but the data's where the fun's at. A great batch of your questions, our answers, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 139 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems, network, and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on December 5th, 2013. This episode is brought to you by our two fine sponsors, GoDaddy and Ting. And of course, our live stream is brought to you by the incredible Scale Engine over at scaleengine.com. You got to go check that out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Good to be back. We took the week off. We'd pre-recorded. So here we are. And a lot of things have happened, Alan, since we've been on the air. Number one, I got to say, we are so close right now as we record this show to busting through the Jupiter Broadcasting limited time 2014 shirt. We have a long sleeve t-shirt, a hoodie, and Alan, we are right now $496 out of $499 that need to be sold.
There you go.
That I think maybe the TechSNAP bump could get us right over there. Somebody could be $500.
I already bought one of each.
Did you? Nice.
Yes.
The hoodie we added later after the fact because...
I had to email support and have them change my order from 2 long sleeve shirts to a long sleeve shirt, a hoodie, and a t-shirt.
And look, we even got a ladies' tee now. That new logo will probably be rolled out... I'm not sure when. We wanted to make sure we put it on the shirt first. That's the first place you can get it. And we won't be making these again. They'll only be available for 1 week and 3 days. Yes. You can go to teespring.com/Jupiter2014 if you want to get one. That's pretty exciting, though.
If you've watched Scaling or watched TechSNAP and you've heard about the TechSNAP t-shirts, there's lots of people that are really sad that they didn't get a t-shirt.
Yeah.
So don't let that be you and get your t-shirt. You only have like 8 days left.
And because it is it is cold, like where I'm sitting right now, we got them that hoodie there is thick. It's good. It's nice. High quality. So I can't wait to get mine. And hopefully, the reason why we did it for a short period of time is hopefully folks can get it in time for the holidays. That was kind of became an impromptu commercial, but we were just so close to the goal that I got all excited. Mm-hmm. All right, Alan. Well, we got a really big show today, actually, it turns out. And we're going to start with good news, finally, for D-Link users, right?
Yes. So if you remember back on episode 132, which was October 17th, we told you about a flaw that they found in a number of D-Link routers that allowed an attacker to entirely bypass the authentication system. Mm-hmm. Basically, if you accessed a D-Link router and you set your user agent to this XML set random character string, which if read backwards says edited by Joel Backdoor, if that string was in your user agent, the D-Link router let you in with no questions asked, right. Which is horrible. And at the time, D-Link promised to have fixed firmware out by the end of October.
Well, how'd that go?
The fixed firmware was released on Monday.
Well, this is December, Alan.
December,
yes.
Also, there's only fixed firmware for some of the affected models, not all of them yet.
So kind of
it took them a little longer to fix that. It took them a little longer than they thought to deliver it, and they only managed to get so many of them fixed so far.
Yeah, so...
but if you should... they have a page where you can download the firmware, and if your device isn't there yet, you should keep checking back and make sure.
I'm sure they'll have it, I guess maybe they just had differences between those OSs more than they... I don't know. Goes to show you they probably don't bother with updating it very often if they couldn't even get the estimate.
Some of the devices are really old, and they might have decided, that device is just not supported anymore.
So we talk about this a lot, and it seems to me the only real solution, long-term solution to this kind of thing is to not use this kind of device. But I don't know what the practical solution there is, because you can't tell Joe and Sally average who don't really use computers to deploy a pfSense box.
Grandma to get a pfSense box.
So how do you solve this? Because even then, you still have to update the pfSense box. And that's half the battle right there, if not more. Whereas people just don't even know to go update them.
The big difference is that, pfSense is open source, so anybody can write the update and it'll get done sooner.
Right. It's not just doesn't get abandoned. So that's a huge factor.
If the author is busy, someone else can write the update and then it can get pushed out. But with the D-Link, it's all proprietary, and you can't tell that how broken it is or how to fix it, or you can't come up with your own little fix in the meantime to keep it from getting exploited until a real fix is out.
For something for the mass market, it just seems like you have to be able to sell it at Best Buy on the shelf. But maybe the way to solve this problem, because I think there's two problems. Number one, it'd be great to have a box where you bought it and sit on the years, guaranteed 3 years of updates. Because I think we could start, as the tech-savvy people, we could start educating people. Make sure you look for the thing that has the 3-year guarantee on it, right? And then the second factor, though, this is the part that might be a little cray-cray, but what about integrating with like an Android app that would send a push notification to your notifications tray when it was time for when a router update was available? And then maybe you could authorize the update via the Android app. Because I'm just thinking of like average mom and dads, they might not even have their computer on more than a couple of times a week when they're at home, but they always have their phone.
Yeah. And, we've looked at things like Cisco want to do auto updates for Linksys routers and stuff. But then, they started bundling with this other stuff, and there was concerns over privacy. And
yeah. Oh, yeah. No,
we've seen just as many updates break things as fix things. So automatically updating the router and then killing it is not something people are going to want either.
Yeah.
And so that's why something like pfSense that's set up with dual firmware, right? That's another thing pfSense has, is that on the, the SSD or hard drive, whatever you do, it actually sets up 2 identical partitions.
Right.
And you run off one, and then it's got the older one. And when you update the older one and try to boot off of it. If it doesn't work, it reboots again and goes off the old one again. And then you have the chance to fix it. Or if it does work, then you keep running off this one. And then next time there's an update, you overwrite the older one. So you're always going back and forth between these two. That way you always have a working system.
Like a dual BIOS. Okay. All right. Well, I was just curious on your thoughts on that, because it does seem to be like a problem that's not getting solved.
There are companies making little devices that'll run things like pfSense, like PC Engines and the Socris and stuff. But they're still a little more hobbyist and expensive.
Yeah. And the end user...
The PC Engine ones are getting pretty cheap, but I don't think they come with a nice case, or if they do, the case is extra.
So here's the root what I'm getting at, is because like in all of these scenarios, the end user needs to know to give a crap to go even update these things. And as we deploy these Internet of Things, and we get all of these devices out there that are running BSDs and Linuxes and embedded Windows and all these different operating systems, and we're just not updating any of them, and we're not educating anybody they need to be updating them. Like, there was this great push in the 90s around, oh, you got to have antivirus. You got to have antivirus on your computer. And like general consumers got that in their head. They got to have antivirus. I got to have I got to have antivirus.
Right, but
here we are not even talking about it.
Have you have a bunch of Androids. Do you get update fatigue with your Android?
The
it's
apps.
Like every day there's like 8 apps wanting to update, and it's like,
Yeah, I mean...
It's like, let's make my phone overly busy and useless for 10 minutes every time I go to pick it up, because it wants to install a bunch of updates. It's like, I don't want the updates happening automatically without my consent, because then it's going to accidentally break something, right? But at the same time, it's like kind of annoying in every direction.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't figured it out yet. That's all.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. So,
at some point you just have to do it, but
I don't mind the updates, because I'll just ignore them until I'm ready. I like getting the new stuff. But I can see what you're saying, where like there is sort of, for the general population, this kind of, they just get tired of it.
Well, like my dad is like, every time you turn on the computer, there's a new Flash update. It's like, you definitely want those.
Yeah.
But every time you turn on the computer, there's a new Flash update.
Right.
Or, the Java one that keeps popping up, but if you do decide to go through it, if you don't uncheck a bunch of boxes and do it just right, here, have some adware.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's also like Windows itself doesn't help, like the older versions. I don't know about 8, but like
8's worse. 8 doesn't give you the option. If you try to put off the updates, it will just it'll be like, I'm turning your computer off in 10 minutes and I don't care what you're in the middle of.
What's so weird about, like, I swear on
even if it's, I'm in the middle of giving a presentation at a conference, I'm just going to turn off. Sorry.
Yeah, so that whole frustrating experience just puts people off. It's it's funny too, because the other Unix and Linux OSs, I much prefer how they because it's all part of one package manager. So when I update a system, I'm just pulling down everything for the security patches and the updates, and they're marked appropriately, so I can elect to only install the security ones if I want to. But I don't have to go to like, I don't have to have a Flash updater, a Java updater, a Windows updater, and then every other single app that has their own updater all built in. And it totally promotes fatigue. And some operating systems have solved it a little better than others. All right, Alan. Well, before we get to our next story, which is a great one, which has No, it's the next one that has the really crazy, cool visual. But the next story is awesome, too. In fact, a little info I've been waiting to hear. But first, I want to thank our first sponsor this week, and that is Ting.com. Ting is mobile that makes sense. They're mobile that's, if you could say it's been rebooted, I would. I'd give it to them. Say, hey, it's mobile that's been rebooted. It's definitely something a little different. Let me show you, I don't know, some of the ways that Ting wants to lead you to the light, my friends. That is with no contracts, no early termination fee. You only pay for what you use. Boom! That's a killer right there, isn't it? Ting also doesn't charge you for data roaming or voice roaming. One of the roamings. We had a guy write into the Linux Action Show on Sunday. He's like, you never mentioned the fact that on Ting I can roam between the Verizon and the Sprint networks. That's kind of a really big deal. And it's like, oh yeah, that is kind of a big deal. I am fortunate. In my neck of the woods, I've got Ting for LTE, 3G, and WiMAX, which is like, so I have the pick of the litter. It's really awesome. If you got that stuff in your area too, you are going to really be impressed with Ting. And if you have a Sprint-compatible phone, you can bring it over to the Ting network. Now, I got right here, Alan, this is the phone you're going to have to get next time you decide to get one, the Nexus 5. Nexus 5 on the Ting network. I ordered it from the Google Play Store. Let's see, it's got that big camera on the back. And it's got an amazing
I was looking at
screen.
getting a Nexus 5 myself. Actually.
Yeah, it's nice. And you know what else it has built into it is that crazy OK Google. OK Google. And then you can give it voice commands. So right now it's listening to everything I say. Hi, Google. Stop it, Google. Go away. It's awesome. And you can see right there on the front page of my Nexus 5, I have my Ting app. You go into there, you log in, and you can set controls for your Ting device. It's sort of a micro version of what you get on the Ting website. The Ting dashboard is kind of incredible. And if you're in a small group or a family, you're going to really appreciate this dashboard and the controls it gives you. Now, don't forget, with Ting, you also get included tethering and hotspot as part of your data plan, and you're only going to pay for the minutes, messages, and the megabytes that you end up using. It's just one $6 flat rate per month, and then that's for the line, and then anything you use on top of that. And you can have a group of phones all pulling from the shared same pooled minutes, and they'll each individually have their own usage fees, which are super simple. You can track them all in the dashboard. And like myself, if I don't need a lot of minutes one month, but when the holidays roll around the next month, I use a lot more minutes, my plan dynamically adapts to my needs for that month. I'm not stuck in some sort of rigid plan structure that I'm often overpaying for and not fully using.
Right. It's like a utility. It's your hydro bill. You pay for how much you used, not for how much you might need to use at one time.
Exactly. And when you combine it with, like, over here on the dashboard, you can set individual alerts and limits for phones. You can set up your voicemail and call forwarding. You can activate and deactivate phones as you don't need them. It's really cool. And the good news is Ting has some new devices coming. The Samsung Galaxy S4 Mini, which I think is actually a pretty compelling phone if you don't need a huge screen, but you want the S4 features. The Galaxy Mega, if you want to go the other direction. They're also going to have the Galaxy Gear. The LG G2's coming. And the other thing you might want to keep your eye out for is the Novatel MiFi 500 they'll be adding. I got to imagine that's a great way to go. Because you think about with the Ting pricing structure, if you don't need that mobile hotspot very much some months, and then other months you're out traveling and you want access to data on the go, you just pay for it when you use it. It's so awesome. It's one of the great things about Ting. Go over to TechSNAP.ting.com, TechSNAP.ting.com to get started. That'll get you $25 off your first device. If you already have a device, they'll give you $25 off your first month. Now, your average Ting bill will range between $21 and $33. $21 to $33 per month for a smartphone plan with hotspot, tethering, messages, all that. Only pay for what you use and no contract. That's awesome. So a big thank you to Ting.
And like you said, they have a price calculator on their website. You go there and you can tell it. You can look at your last phone bill, plug in the figures, and tell you how much money you'll save.
Alan, if they don't have just a price calculator, they're giving out Starbucks coffee gift certificates to folks who try out the savings calculator from Verizon and AT&T. So if you're on the AT&T or Verizon network and you want to check it out, you go to first go to TechSNAP.ting.com, so that way you get that R discount, and then you can visit ting.com/coffee. Try out their pricing calculator, and like Alan's saying, you just kind of see where your savings is going to be at. I think if you're coming from those networks too, you are going to be amazed at what you're going to get and how much you'll have to pay. So get started by going to techsnap.ting.com. Huge thank you to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program.
For sure.
Alan, I think I'll let you get us on track now to our second story. This one, another massive password leak. 2 million passwords that have been snagged, right?
This one's different, though. This is not a website that got hacked. It was people's individual computers. So over at Spider Labs, they've managed to find a botnet controller for the Pony botnet and take it over and go into the dashboard and see what was there. So this is a botnet that was infecting a couple million computers, and it was running a keylogger and harvesting the passwords people are using to log into things. So in this case, it doesn't matter how secure your password is. Even if you're using LastPass, it's capturing it when you're putting it in the password box on the website.
Yeah.
Because the malware is running on your computer.
Yep.
So in this case, even having a really great password it doesn't matter if your computer's compromised.
And the problem, and I've always, I'm a big LastPass advocate, but I have to admit, it seems like the vulnerability with LastPass is really when it's using the clipboard to transfer the password to the browser.
Although actually, depending on how the keylogger works, if it's actually intercepting the keys, the clipboard thing might actually save you.
Yeah. In this case, but there's, other malware could easily read the clipboard.
Right.
It's read only. It
would have to be looking. It would have to, that's not where you're going to find most users.
Right.
If you're targeting LastPass users with your malware, then it might make sense to do that.
Mm-hmm.
The one where you have to be careful with the clipboard is if you're packaging up virtual machines and stuff. But anyway, so in total, they managed to get 1.58 million website login credentials, 320,000 email account credentials, 41,000 FTP accounts. It's interesting how many people are still using FTP.
We use it,
Well, yeah, we use it, but I mostly use SFTP so that the password is encrypted when it goes over the wire.
Yeah.
But it's not something you expect many average users. It's not something you expect most users that are going to have malware on their systems.
Right, yeah.
To be using a lot of FTP.
Yeah. Got to be work or something.
3,000 remote desktop logins. You're talking like servers and stuff almost there. And 3,000 SSH account credentials. So you're definitely talking like shells and servers there, right?
Yeah.
So, 3,000 out of millions isn't that much, but at the same time, that's quite a few SSH accounts. Looking at the domains for that 1.6 million websites, 325,000 from Facebook, 70,000 from Google, mostly Gmail and stuff. Yahoo, again, mostly email. Twitter, LinkedIn, bunch of other places. They have some graphs on there. One of the graphs makes it look like almost all of the users that were compromised were in the Netherlands. But it's actually, they had a couple of servers in the Netherlands that were reverse proxies to the controller. So the infected machines connect to the server in the Netherlands, which then proxies the connection back to the actual command and control server, so that when people are like looking at their connection or an antivirus company is watching, run the virus in a virtual machine and watch it connect out, they would find the machine in the Netherlands and go and get that taken down. And that wouldn't actually get the actual command and control server taken down, just these proxies. And so that's why the traffic looks like it all is coming from the Netherlands, because there was a couple servers there that they were using. And those were acting as reverse proxies. The really sad information that got here is when they had all these passwords in plain text, they decided to take a look at, what the passwords were like. And on top of the fact that lots of people still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as their password, or, the word password or the word admin and so on. They broke it down. 6% of the passwords were terrible, being like 4 characters, all lowercase and things like that. 28% were bad, meaning they only had one type of character. So like it was just all letters, lowercase. 44% were medium. Only 17% were good, which is you have like uppercase and lowercase or whatever. And only 5% of the passwords were excellent, being, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and special characters.
Yeah.
So it kind of brings us to the conclusion that even after years of being told that you need to pick a unique and a strong password, and after all the breaches at, MySpace, Gawker, and LinkedIn, and we got these, or Adobe, and we got all these lists of horrible passwords people use, people are still using them.
Yeah. I think by now that would have sunk into the general consciousness to knock it off. I guess it depends on part of the problem is a lot of people set a password once and then never change it. So you set it 3-4 years ago. Maybe now you know better, but you know.
And just the number of people using people's names, right? Or the name brand, the logo off their computer or their mouse or whatever's sitting right in front of them when they're typing.
You know what it really is at the end of the day? Is
that was horrible because it's like, well, what if you're using a different computer?
At the end of the day, people just don't want to forget it, and they need to be able to type it. And I will give you this, too. Part of the problem that throws me for a loop is mobile. Because if I have to log into something like, say, like, you know, a remote control app that logs into a remote third-party service or Netflix or whatever it is a pain in the butt to have to use, even LastPass on mobile.
Right. Like, I will admit, you know, logging into my bank with my cell phone to do the take a picture of a check thing is quite a hassle. But I'd rather it be quite a hassle than remember my username and password.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, that's disappointing. Now you got me bummed out. Do you have any like positive spin on this or anything that makes me not depressed about humanity's intelligence?
There's additional coverage from CNN talking more about what happened and how it worked. It's less in-depth and more geared towards people that wouldn't understand all the details. I try to provide both links, you know, the one that's from the researchers and it's got the gory details and the one that's more of a just overview explaining what was going on.
Maybe as people realize more and more that their crap is all online, they'll start caring more, and maybe just the tech people have figured that out sooner than the rest of the herd. I don't know, Alan. I mean, I'm a huge password hygiene advocate. I try to push people in that direction all the time. I think that's kind of, we all have to take that responsibility on to inform the public. Even so, I was in last night's Unfiltered supporter show. I was playing a clip about somebody who got really embarrassing stuff on their Facebook account, right? And they had a really dumb password. Again, it was just like a name or whatever. And so they got their account logged into, which of course the media calls hacked, right? And they had all of the contents that were very private downloaded from that account. And so this, you know, they blame the person, but at the same time, I think some responsibility has to go on the person who used password 123 as their password. And maybe service providers? What about responsibility on the service providers to set stringent password policies, like force rotation after after every 12 months or something? That could help too.
And well, even just, you know, we've now very clearly have a list of really bad passwords. And how about just blacklisting all of those? You know, here's the 1,000 worst possible bloody passwords, and no one's allowed to use them on any site ever again. Yeah, that would work too. How hard would it be to blacklist the password and say you can't use that?
Right.
And also, you know, especially when you're on sites where you know a bit about the person, you can easily say you can't use your name as part of the password. Right? Or your password can't contain any significant part of your email address.
All right. Okay. So we got to just kind of start kicking butt all around. We got to kick end users' butt. We got to kick our own butts. And we got to kick service providers' butts. So we got a lot of butt kicking to do, people. And you know, there is a great way to save a little money while you're out there kicking. And that's GoDaddy.com. We got a great Black Friday deal that's been extended since we were off last week to Monday the 9th. So it's only good until Monday the 9th. But if you use the promo code 35SAVE4, 35, the number 35, save, the number 4, all together, 35SAVE4 when you check out, you'll get 35% off anything new over at GoDaddy.com. You need a .com. You need yourself a .net. You need an SSL. If it's a new product, you go grab that and use the code 35SAVE4. 35SAVE4. Get you 35% off whatever in your shopping cart. That's only good until the 9th. That's a really nice deal. And we haven't seen one of these for a little while, so go take advantage of that. And of course, Alan, did you know that GoDaddy does some hosting of some of the largest sites on the web?
Yes, I did.
In fact, you knew that because you had a link to an awesome infographic right here. Did they put this out, or who put the?
I know. Host Cabinet.
Yeah, pretty neat.
It's a domain hack. It's Host Cabinet.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they did a look at the 100,000 biggest or most popular websites on the internet and who hosts them, and GoDaddy was number 6 most popular hosting company.
That's pretty cool.
And that's only looking at the 1,000 most popular sites. GoDaddy, as a portion of especially smaller sites, is huge.
GoDaddy hosts one of the
especially
largest
the more-
proportion of the 100,000 most popular websites on the internet. So how
but
about that?
also even more in the way of the less popular websites. The little
Blogs
stores and stuff. And
restaurants.
and if you looked at blogs, not many people are going to be paying for Amazon EC2 instances for their blog.
Right. Or like I always mention Angela's mom's restaurant. She doesn't
Yep.
need to have that on AWS. She has it on a GoDaddy blog. And it's perfect for her. In fact, we also still have the website builder you guys can go take advantage of. That's a really good deal too.
And,
But
the GoDaddy hosting costs, per month less than most people pay for Amazon for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
For an EC2 instance.
yeah, that's very true.
When they have sales, sometimes you can end up paying for a year what most people will pay for a couple of hours of Amazon.
Yeah, our website builder deal right now is still $1 per month for hosting, the domain, and support, 24/7 support if you use the code WSB7 when you check out. That gets you the website builder, the SEO optimization, the mobile spin-off version, and their integrated configuration and hosting package. But right now, 35 save 4 when you check out over at GoDaddy to get 35% off. That's a really great deal. So thanks to GoDaddy for giving us that special extended Black Friday deal since we were off last week. We really appreciate that. 35 save 4. And thanks to all of you guys who take advantage of our sponsors. It keeps us going. All right, Alan. Well, now this next story has one of the coolest visuals I think we've ever had on the TechSNAP program. And
Yes.
the really cool thing is, in fact, it's so cool they did like a how we made this video. That's how you know it's good. And it's all HTML5 too. So
Yep.
I'll go through some of this while you tell us about hackers being courted by governments.
Yeah. So Rolling Stone was doing some profiles and interviews at Hack Miami, which is this meetup where hackers go to show off their skills to corporate and government recruiters. And they also had a cyber war games where the hackers would simulate attacks against various targets and different networks and things like that. And so, it's this huge website. In the print magazine, this would have been like 15 pages or more.
Yeah.
And they talked to different recruiters and different hackers and government officials and so on about, what was happening in the industry and so on. And one recruiter's pitch was about, we build an environment that allows people to legally do things that would normally get them put in jail.
Well, that is a legitimate pitch.
Yep. And part of that company's pitch was, if you want to go work for the government to be a security researcher, you have to go, you have to meet all these requirements to get a security clearance, and you have to wear a tie every day and things like that, right? And to a lot of people with kind of a hacker ethos, that's not really something they're willing to do.
Right.
But at the same time, to work for the FBI, you have to have like 3 years of being drug free, and a lot of computer science students and hackers coming out of college or whatever maybe haven't been 3 years without doing drugs.
Right.
And these security companies are willing to hire them where the government is not. And they talk about some of that stuff. But they also have a leaked report from the Department of Homeland Security back from May, I think, found that there's an increasing hostility aimed against online U.S. critical infrastructure, like power grids, water supplies, banks, and so on. Right? And so that's why the government wants to gear up and get more and more of these people working for them. And they're trying to, persuade people with the whole public service argument and protecting the nation and so on. But David
it's also
Marcus,
a good justification to spend a lot of money.
Yes. Yes. And speaking of basically computer science people trying to get into this, industrial defense kind of complex, military industrial complex, David Marcus, who's the director of Threat Intelligence and Advanced Research at the McAfee Federal Advanced Programs Group, which sounds like it belongs to Lockheed Martin rather than McAfee.
And McAfee's part of Intel, right?
Yep. It says that the effects could be devastating, right? If you shut off large portions of the power grid, you're not sending people back to 1960. You're sending them back to 1860. And he says, shut off an interconnected society's power for 3 weeks in this country, and you'll have complete chaos. And I think he's right. We saw how much craziness happened just with the 2003 blackout, and that was only a couple of hours, really, right?
Very true. I A day or two? I mean, Jupiter Broadcasting would miss some shows.
Right.
A week or two, God, that would really suck.
Well, once you're getting into weeks, you're talking like, no refrigeration for food.
Yeah.
Right? You're talking serious food spoilage and shortages, and, it can affect things like running water even, right?
Like, if
when you get down to that level, and even things that are designed to be able to handle things like, backup diesel generators stuff, fuel supply starts to be a problem once you have an outage that lasts that long. And if the oil refineries are getting shut down because they don't have power either for a protracted amount of time, then it's just, things are going to go quite crazy.
Jeez, you're freaking me out, Alan.
Yeah. Which is partly part of the goal of the government when they're trying to get justify funding for this type of stuff.
Yeah.
But in another one that's more along the lines of what people in TechSNAP are really interested in, they did a profile of a guy known as Street. It says the government agencies and different corporations fly Street around the world to see if he can bullshit his way into the most sensitive data centers. He's scammed his way into banks in Beirut, financial centers across the road from Ground Zero in New York, state treasury departments. He records his infiltrations using a spy watch. A little watch that's got a 16 gigabyte HD video recorder in it with infrared lights. And he turns the footage over to his clients at the end. When Rolling Stone asked him about the tricks of his trade and so on, he tells them the 2 keys to stealing data in person. A, act like you're supposed to be there.
Yep. And
B, carry a tablet PC, which convinces victims that you're some tech support worker. He says people see these things, waving the tablet, and, they think it's magic.
God,
right?
Government's paying this guy to do this?
The digital equivalent of a clipboard now is
that.
a tablet PC, right?
I could do that. I got a tablet. I can act like I own the place.
Yeah.
Damn it. I mean, that as I've shared in the show, and you've shared too, as a contractor, I learned that as a technique to get in and get the job done. And it just avoided any kind of confusion and lots of questions. I just pretended like I own the place.
Yep.
Huh. Yeah, we've heard from people in the audience, too, that have agreed that they do that kind of work.
Just have a clipboard. Well,
a
tablet apparently is as good as a clipboard now.
Makes sense. And so when I started working, I worked for 3 months at a school district as doing like tech support, contract tech support. And so the teachers, the high school campus and some of the middle schools, big campuses, they didn't know who I was. They'd never seen me. Often the first time I'd ever been there. And so I did that. I had an iPad that the district provided. I had the tickets. I would never do anything. I would look at the tickets to look at what room maybe, but the interface totally sucked balls on the iPad, so I wouldn't really actually use it for actual work. But it was part of the reason I carried it is because it made the teacher more comfortable because it looked like I was supposed to be there. And so they would just kind of let me sit down and start working at their computer, even when they're in the middle of maybe teaching a class.
Yep. So further down in there, they have some cool visuals. It says, to see what the front lines of cyber war really look like, the reporter went to the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center in Arlington, Virginia, the NCCIC, which is the Department of Homeland Security's mission control. And it looks exactly like it's described there. It's one of the most important hubs for digital warfare alongside the FBI and the NSA. Basically, walls of video screens showing online attacks against the IRS and NASA.
Well, it looks like, so I see 2 Fox News streams and a CNN stream, and then in the middle they have Audacity screenshots up.
Yeah, I think they were just trying to make it look good. And it said, that the IRS and the NSA were, or not NSA.
God, they're
NASA
using Internet Explorer, Alan.
Distributed knowledge service attacks, and they're monitoring that and such.
Dear God, they're using Internet Explorer.
Yeah.
So
like
there
I
you
said,
go.
A lot of this is literally just cliches and hand waving.
Heart of America's cyber defense. They're using Internet Explorer, and over here it looks like a little Excel spreadsheet action up on a screen. That's good. Wow. Yeah. I like that they have 2 streams of Fox News. They've got Fox News Business and Fox News proper, so that way they're not missing a thing.
Yeah, and it does make you raise some serious questions about what's actually going on.
If you guys want to see that picture, actually, This whole Rolling Stone piece it's just an impressive piece of technology. So go check the show notes for that. I'll put a link to it right now in the chat room. All right, Alan, any other notes on that one?
No, that's about it for that one.
Wow. Well, that's crazy. Okay, well, that's the news for this week, isn't it?
It is.
Very nice. Then that brings us to the feedback. If you'd like to get a hold of the TechSNAP show, one of the best ways you can do it is by going to our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv, and you can always get other input. That was really good while we were off, because people had questions still, and they were sending them into the show, and we weren't here to answer them. I felt guilty as heck, but the folks that asked in the subreddit, a lot of you guys out there went and provided answers, and really good ones, too. Like, so much so that I read through them, and I was like, they got it. We don't need to bother with it. Like, they solved it. And the person, like, was able to ask follow-up questions, so that was really cool. So thank you guys for help covering that gap while we were on break. Okay, Alan. Well, speaking of the feedback, well, that's all done. Let's go do the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of our website, or as you know, even better, starting a thread over at links.techsnap.tv. And Alan, our first question this week actually comes from that very subreddit. This one came in, and everybody brace yourselves because we're about to badmouth ZFS here for a second. So hold on. It came
this
in from,
guy is about to.
Right.
Not me.
I know. Oh, I know. Dave QB writes, and he says, I keep hearing that although ZFS has dedupe, you should never use it. Anecdotally, I've never used it myself in my own ZFS setup, and I've spent a good time removing it from my pool. You need a lot of RAM to use it, and the amount of data you can dedupe with RAM means it's cheaper to buy bigger disks and use less RAM not to dedupe. You hear a lot of backup solutions implementing deduplication. Bacula was mentioned in the latest show. This uses file-level dedupe, and there is no mention of never to use it. So this all tells me that ZFS has a bad implementation of deduplication. Even common knowledge to only use it in rare edge cases. ZFS is great, but it looks like it needs to re-implement dedupe in ZFS so it can be used by people, and say ZFS has dedupe without the need for a disclaimer. Am I missing something?
Yeah, the problem isn't the implementation of dedupe. The problem is your understanding of dedupe. The first thing is the way Bacula does it is using the database to store the list of hashes in the files and do the deduping, which is fine, but it's ridiculously slow, which is fine for a backup, right? When you're taking a backup, you don't need it to be doing ridiculously fast lookups to decide what to dedupe and so on. But in ZFS, you want it to be fast, right? And that's why it stores it in RAM. Technically, you can use dedupe where you keep the dedupe table on disk, like it would if you were using a Bacula and you're storing it in the database. But it's really slow, and because of some limitations of ZFS, if you can't fit it all in memory when you're mounting a pool after it's been improperly dismounted, it can cause problems where you can't import the pool.
Okay.
But in general, one of the differences is you're not looking at discrete files. You're looking at the blocks, right? So you're looking at every block instead of every file. So most files are made up of many blocks. So you're talking about a lot more discrete units. And also, ZFS is using a really strong hash, right? SSD 256. So you've seen the hashes are like this long. So you're storing a hash this long, and then the reference to where that is on disk.
Mm-hmm.
And then every time you go and write a new block, it has to calculate the hash of that block and then scan that table and see if that hash is already in the list anywhere. And if it is, then it says, all right, I don't need to write this down. It already exists over here. But if it isn't on, if it isn't on the table, then it's like, I'll have to add that to the table and then write down where I wrote it down on the disk so that the next time that block comes up, we don't need to do it. But it just, it takes a lot of RAM. But
so ButterFS, get ready for this, has what they call out of band or offline.
Offline dedupe.
Yeah. What do you think of that kind of functionality? Is there anything like, would they implement something like that?
No, so that takes care of the problem of writing it down quickly and then going back and reclaiming the space after. Yep. But it doesn't help that much, and it relies on the original idea was to have that in ZFS, but it relies on a feature that is not done.
I mean, frankly, to me, this sounds like the job of a bash script. If it's like you want to just like if, for example, you have a file server that has user home directories, right? And everybody has a copy of one Word doc template that you need to use if you want to submit for vacation time.
I mean, that's file level, not block level.
Right. Right. Yeah. No. I guess. I suppose if you're looking for block level, then yeah. Okay.
I guess you would you go through and like make hard links instead. But then, what if one user updates their copy of the file? Do you want it? You don't want that to change the other person's file.
Okay.
There's a lot more complexity to it than in a backup. You don't have to worry about the file changing in the future.
But you could see the scenario, okay, but for a home folder setup, you could see the scenario where something like offline dedupe would be handy because you could just schedule the server to take care of that at 11 o'clock at night when nobody's using the server.
Right. But so ZFS could add that if we had block pointer rewriting, but it's basically like magic unicorn powder. It would solve every problem. It's actually possible to do it.
Yeah, I gotcha.
And I don't know how the ButterFS does it, but it doesn't seem like it's that easy of a problem to actually solve.
So this next question, it was one of those that maybe I went, oh yeah, let's see what Alan thinks.
So for ZFS for deduplication, it's just a really hard problem, and the feature in ZFS was designed for big enterprises who could afford the RAM if they really needed it.
Right. Yeah. But
also, that feature was written like quite a few years ago. Right?
Well, so he essentially came to the conclusion on his own, is what's more important to you? Do you want to just invest in more storage, or do you want to invest in more memory? And it sounds like for him, he was looking at the economics of it, and storage is the way to go.
When the feature was invented in the early 2000s, that wasn't necessarily the case.
Yeah. Well, and also the kind of machines that Sun would be selling it on would have...
compression wasn't at the place it is now. And you couldn't get the CPU horsepower to do compression at gigabits a second, or gigabytes a second, that you can now.
All right. So Todd writes in, he says, hello, a storage vendor recently recommended using a NAS populated with SSD drives as a storage solution. They argue this would provide low latency for database usage while avoiding all of the complexity of mitigating spindle contention. If the cost of the drives is affordable, is this considered a viable option yet? Thanks for the show, Todd. So, Alan, do you ever concern yourself with mitigating the spindle contention?
A little bit. It comes down to a couple of different factors. First of all, if you're using cheap SSDs, the problem you have is longevity, right? They burn out, right? They can only do so many writes. If you're using the more expensive SSDs, then the prices are ridiculous.
I got to imagine, though, they're working with a vendor to sell a NAS that's trying to pitch them on. Those are probably enterprise grade. Those higher end, the ones.
So, I did a quick search through Newegg and stuff when I was prepping the show notes. So, an Intel Data Center Edition S3700 SSD. I bought 2 of these for my new server from IX Systems. They have the 100 gig drives are $250 a piece. And the 200 gig drives are $500 a piece, and so on. So it's $2.50 per gigabyte.
Yeah.
Looking at Western Digital Nearline SAS Enterprise high-end, like dual-ported hard drives, at 4 terabyte drives, they're 9.2 cents per gigabyte versus $2.50 for SSD. Right? Or if you look at like a Seagate SATA desktop drive, they're 3 cents per gigabyte versus $2.50 per gigabyte. You're almost talking 100 times cheaper for the storage.
So do you think there could be a database type workload where the performance of an SSD would be so critical that it'd be worth that premium?
Depending on some setups and stuff. Like at Scale Engine, we actually use SSDs for our database because, yes, it's the latency, right?
Well, hell, in the case of the CDN, don't you even use RAM? Like you use the RAM?
For the CDN, we use a bit of RAM for the really popular stuff, and the rest is on hard drive. And because the latency's... At that point, we're doing internet
that's a hell of a
latency.
premium.
Right, but on the internet, we're dealing with like millisecond, tens and hundreds of millisecond latency are okay. In a database, hard drives you're looking at are like, single milliseconds.
Yeah.
Whereas as SSDs are decimals of milliseconds or less. Mm-hmm. And so seeking and stuff, the SSDs are faster. But at some point, it comes down to different things, right? If you're looking at IOPS, depending on the workload and the type of SSDs, some SSDs can only do like 5,000 IOPS or something, right? Some of them can actually do up to like 50,000 though. Or, actually, I saw a demonstration at EuroBSDCon of 16 Intel SSDs put together doing 1 million IOPS.
Well, I guess, is this, maybe this is a replacement to using, because here's what I'm thinking of, like the high-performance NASs that I have experience with have had just enormous RAM caches, RAM caches, and you could provision certain parts. It depends.
For a database, when you're doing a synchronous write, that the database has to wait until the storage says this is all the way on storage that is safe, even if the power goes out.
Right. That's true.
That's why for ZFS we have the ZIL device, the ZFS intent log, that would cache it to an SSD and then flush it to the disk after, so that we can answer those synchronous requests faster. Anyway, so it comes down to deciding what makes sense at certain ratios, certain needs. Having a lot of disks is actually better than having SSDs. For example, if you bought 8 of the 800 gig SSDs, that would cost $16,000. For that price, you could buy like a ridiculous. You could buy 160 of the 3 terabyte Seagate drives.
Or you could make sure you're investing in redundancy in the power, in the connectivities, in the controllers, and how you connect that NAS box to your servers. Is that redundant? Right. You can invest that money in a service contract where the representative would be there within minutes. You might even actually be able to invest that money to be able to buy a second rig, like an exact duplicate of the unit you have.
More than that, yeah.
Yeah.
So, if you're comparing 8 of these high-end SSDs to 160 hard drives, maybe the 160 hard drives can actually pull off more of the performance you need. Although a chassis that'll fit 160 hard drives is a little... And, then you're looking at things like how much extra power is that using? But then you're looking at the storage space. For the same amount of money, you could have 6.4 terabytes of SSD storage or 480 terabytes of spinning storage.
I would hope they could provide you with some benchmarks. Maybe even let you benchmark it.
It comes down to which workload you have.
Yeah.
But using all SSDs is definitely an option.
Yeah. The enterprise-grade SSDs.
If this is, a SAN specifically for backing a database, maybe the amount of storage isn't as important as the latency and the throughput.
Right.
And the number of IOPS.
Right.
In which case, then yes, SSD-backed stuff makes perfect sense. But... when you're looking at the prices, $2.50 a gig versus 9 cents a gig, maybe if you're just after storage, the cheaper one makes more sense. Another trick that I've seen done is it's called short stroking. So you have like a 3 terabyte hard drive, and we know with spinning hard drives that they're faster at the beginning of the drive, right? And if your biggest concern is latency and also just the difference in latency, what you can do is partition your 3 terabyte drive to only use the first 100 terabytes off the drive. Right?
Does that work?
So now the heads never have to leave that first 100 terabytes. So your seek time's a lot less, right? Because the seek time they advertise is based on jumping from one random place to another random place on the disk. But if you constrain that to only using the first couple of tracks on the fastest part of the disk, then you can get more consistent and better response times. And you're throwing away a huge portion of the drive, right? It's a 3 terabyte drive. You're only going to use the first 100 gigs. But if the drive's so much cheaper that you can afford to do that,
right,
then it may provide you with the performance you need for less money than the SSD.
You would have to, in order to go, so the other thing to zoom out a little bit, to go with an SSD-based solution, because, assuming all things be equal, this is what your workload requires, you'd have to guarantee that everything that would be touching that server would be absolutely performing at its absolute peak performance. Like the network interfaces, your switches, you're going to probably have to have some of your systems dual honed. I mean, to get advantages like that, unless it's sheer number of machines that will be connected to that NAS device, if it's only a couple of systems that are going to connect to a NAS device with SSDs in it like that, you better make sure your connectivity is rocking. You need to get...
Well, it depends. If they might not be after throughput, right? If it's a database, it might just be the latency, how long it takes.
Or the other thing I was thinking about is I was thinking to a client that had several VM servers, and in those VM servers they had terminal servers in there, and they all had it going down to one NAS, and that NAS needed to just be a monster because it was essentially not only 3 VM hosts, but then maybe 3 for 5 users in each terminal server. So it was a ton of users hitting that thing for their whole desktop session all the time. And it wasn't that they necessarily had to have one instance that was insanely performant, but they needed to make sure that every little person that did connect to it got great performance, because otherwise things don't work correctly in a terminal server under VMware. So, I mean, I know there's a lot of different work cases here, but I don't know. Final call, Alan, would you... your final call is yes, they are ready.
They're useful in certain cases, yes.
But it's you got to really make
sure. We run
sure.
our databases off SSDs, but we're doing that in the local machine rather than a separate NAS, because that shortens the latency even more, right? Because you don't involve the network at all.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, like your point, if you have 8 or 10 of these SSDs in a machine in order to, and do ZFS on them or something, you're looking at, your network needs to be able to push 40 gigabits a second if you're going to get 500 megabytes a second off each of 8 or 10 SSDs. Mm-hmm. But again, you might not be after, if you're saturating the throughput, you're going to run out of storage really quickly. So most likely, if you're doing high throughput, then you're going to need big disks, and you're going to. Whereas if what you're after is, your database isn't all that big, you just need it to be really, really fast and be able to seek all over it and write all over it and stuff. Then there's definitely the advantage to the SSDs. And if your needs are really that high end, you might want to look at something like a Fusion IO card that is basically rated NAND storage on a card.
So I did something kind of interesting that I think probably a lot of people will give me crap for, including yourself. But we've talked before about Angela's photo collection and how insane it is. And the characteristics of iPhoto are such that the way it displays that photo library is it immediately has to call on a thumbnail of every single photo when you go to the main library page, right? And then you can also have scrubbing features where you scrub an album and it rapidly displays every single photo in that album as you scrub across it. So it is very I/O intensive. But we needed to get it out of Angela's computer because she didn't have enough storage overall to store the whole library. So the first thing I got her was a 3 terabyte external FireWire 800, because that's her best connectivity option, because her Thunderbolt port's used for her external monitor. So I got her a FireWire 800, 4 terabyte, I think it was, external FireWire drive. It was good. I did some testing on it. It was fine. The limiting factor was definitely the throughput of the FireWire 800 connection. But I then before I switched over her photo library,
that'd be faster than the max throughput of the hard drive, wouldn't it?
The hard drive had that was one of the reasons I got it. It had like 100 and something meg. It had a really good performing. It was a really good performing connection. But what I decided to do, just to see what would happen, and this is definitely where the limiting connection was the FireWire 800, was I hooked up an external SSD FireWire 800 device. It's one of these like multi interfaces, and 800's one of them they just threw on there. And the 800 interface isn't any faster. It didn't perform in raw throughput speeds any faster than the external spinning drive did. But in terms of iPhoto performance, like all of that random reading all over the drive to pull up those thumbnails and all of that stuff.
Lots of seeking.
All that seeking stuff, it made a big difference for her photo library. So even though she's only be able to, I can't remember what the top speed was, but it's like 80 megabytes or something weak. I can't remember. She's only able to get that, but the seek time is way better for her photo library. And so she's noticed a big improvement, and the application doesn't crash as much for her now. So there is, it is interesting how there is definitely use cases where SSDs wouldn't normally seem right. Like on the face of it, I wouldn't have bought an SSD drive just to hang off a FireWire 800 interface. That wouldn't have seemed worth the investment. Or just to
store photos on, because you're like, photos don't need to be highlighted.
Right.
And, if you have a lot of photos, you want a lot of storage, not a lot of speed.
And I'm glad I tested it, because when I hooked it up, I definitely noticed a difference, and now that's how she runs, and it's a smaller unit.
What'd be really nice is if, Mac managed to regrow its ZFS support, and then you could just
don't get me started, Alan.
Whatever drive connected to the Mac.
HFS Plus is a joke. HFS Plus is a joke.
It is.
And
it's an old joke.
Yeah. All right. So Adam needs some help. He writes in. He says, "Hi, Chris and Alan. Could you explain what forward secrecy is and how it works? I heard that
forward secrecy.
I heard that Twitter has recently implemented it to strengthen security against surveillance. Is it really enough to keep the NSA away? Keep up the great work. Your shows are the best." So yeah, he is talking about perfect forward.
Right. So perfect forward security or secrecy is basically using specific protocols and stuff when you're doing SSL, so that the key that's being used is temporary and is never used a second time. So that the general idea is that so that someone can't capture the encrypted connection and then later on decrypt it. Or if they manage to decrypt one of them, it doesn't help them decrypt any of the other connections that have ever happened. It's not the order of the ciphers. It's only certain ciphers support it. And then by setting the order, you can ensure that the ones that provide PFS get used first, right, are their preference. The hold up until recently was that Internet Explorer and all the Microsoft stuff didn't support it, but Microsoft is making a push to be able to do that now. And yes, it uses the Diffie-Hellman key exchange and optionally elliptic curve encryption.
Yeah. All right. Next email comes in from Ben. He says, "Hello, guys. I'm creating a website to use as a video podcasting platform for different shows, and I was curious what tools did you use for creating your websites, as I like the look and the feel of it." Well, Alan, we both use, I gotcha. We're both using, actually, for people watching the video version, I got a little trick for you. I'm not going to say anything because the audio people won't catch it. So you use WordPress on bsdnow.tv, right? And,
no.
No?
No.
I thought you were using WordPress.
No, the BSD Now website is Pico CMS, which is a Markdown renderer. So we write...
Are you S-ing me? That's awesome.
We write the pages by hand in Markdown in like VI or Nano or...
What's it called?
Whatever. Pico CMS. Pico.
Damn it,
CMS.
that's so cool, because that would be awesome.
So we just create a directory structure. Like I have a directory called episodes, and I just make a file in there with the date dash the episode name.
Oh my God, that's the way to do it.
Paste the show notes in, and it writes it up. And then I have so I made some changes to the template so that it loops over that list of it looks in the episodes directory. And at the bottom of the front page, it pulls like the 20 most recent episodes. And at the bottom of every other page, it just pulls the 4 most recent episodes. And so it was all basically done by hand.
This would be
It's not the way I would recommend anybody else do it.
Really? Because the problem with WordPress is that it's a pain in the ass. I mean, I like it and I use it.
Well, but this one, basically, you write everything in a text editor. If you're not happy to do that, like I wrote all the HTML is basically done by hand. I started with a template that I bought, and then I reworked it to fit in this template engine, and then there's a couple of for loops, and that's about it.
I don't know. I probably would not recommend WordPress, but you could use it. You could also,
and, there's plugins that will automatically do galleries of videos and stuff. Although most of them, it gets complicated.
Why not just do a Tumblr blog or something like that, or maybe a WordPress.com? I don't know. It's just if the WordPress,
it depends how much control you need over the stuff, and
but there's a lot. That's the least of your problems.
GoDaddy, then they have the thing where they update the WordPress for you, and
that could be a way to do it too. Is the other thing to note is don't store. So here's a good example. Like do like what Alan recommended. Go set up a GoDaddy site, put it on there, and then store the files on a different server. And GoDaddy has options. There's other options. There's libsyn, all kinds of stuff. So don't store your media files on your web server. Just don't do that.
Right.
And that's a great step right there.
When it's busy, you don't want the website to be slow on top of everything else.
Yeah, because then if you get a few people downloading your show, and then the next guy shows up to you, and your website won't load. Now you look like a clown. So don't be a clown. Do it right. That's all I have to say about that. I had no idea about Pico CMS. That's a good one.
I started using it for my blog.
Yeah.
And I fell so in love with it that I'm like, when it's time to do the BSD Now site, I'm like, the three of us that are working on this are most comfortable editing text files. And, you got me into Markdown, and so I'm just used to writing my show notes in Markdown. So we literally just copy and paste the Google Doc into the Markdown file, and done. We even write tutorials in Markdown.
That's how we do all of the show notes.
We added a bit of custom CSS so that, when stuff's tabbed in a certain way, it makes it in a code box and pre-formats.
Oh, yeah, nice. Yeah, okay.
But yeah, it's all done with Markdown. It's
who's a Markdown master is Heather too for SciByte. Yep. She's got some of the craziest Markdown going on. Plus, she intermixes in regular straight up HTML too.
Laser Mike just pasted the link in the chat room.
Yeah, pico.dev7studios.com. pico.dev7studios.com.
And it's they have a little tutorial on how to do the blog feature.
Markdown's really handy. And the convenience of Google Docs to work collaboratively if you have a few people on your show is pretty nice too. That's something I'm going to have to eventually replace, but I just...
Well, because actually the original idea with ours was my personal blog is actually managed in Subversion, right? So I just commit changes, and that was the idea to do that have a repo and just have
That'd be a
three of
really
us
cool
be
way
able
to do show notes.
to have the people commit stuff.
I still really like I like even just the real time. Like I could highlight a sentence in the doc.
The real time stuff. Google Docs has the advantage for when we're actually working on it collaboratively. But for like posting stuff on the website, it has a decent workflow, and it's kind of what I'm getting used to because it's how you do the website for FreeBSD.org is. It's not written in Markdown. It's written in a markup language called DocBook. But you make changes, you write a patch, you get it reviewed, and then it gets posted on the website.
All right, so David's going to write in. He's got a DNS reflection attack question. He says, my primary DNS server was hit with a bunch of reflection attacks, and so I learned a bit about it and made all the changes needed to prevent that. How do public DNS servers like Google's allow recursive lookups and avoid reflection attacks unless they are non-standard TCP? They can't prevent client IPs from being spoofed over UDP. Thanks for the show.
Mostly rate limiting. So, they know there's so many requests coming in or whatever. And so the way the spoofing attack works is you get too many replies sent to one place, right? You get a whole bunch of people send a spoof attack all claiming to be that they're the victim. So all you have Google and OpenDNS and so on set up their rules so that they won't send more than so many packets, so many responses back to the same person. So then you just rate limit the DNS reflection attack. So if any one person is trying to do too many DNS lookups, Google just stops listening for a couple seconds at a time. And this mitigates it. It doesn't stop the DNS reflection attack, but it mitigates it somewhat.
Okay. All right, so I think I'm going to say this next one, Thornstein, I'm not sure. But he's in our Icelandic bureau, and he writes in, hey guys, love the show. It makes my Friday morning gym visits something to look forward to. You probably saw this already, but I wanted to be sure you could shame Vodafone in Iceland. So he sends us a link to a cyberwarnews.info page. Here's the gist of it, though, Alan. Plain text passwords, private SMSs from politicians, and all that good stuff leaked. He gives us a link to the Google Translate page. Looks pretty bad. It looks really bad. And he also says, by the way, keep up the good work on TechSNAP, BSD Now, LAS, and Linux Unplugged. And it says, regards from Iceland. That is a huge story. I don't really know if I've seen a lot of coverage over here. Have we seen?
Yeah, probably not for that one. No, it's not in English. It's probably why.
It is always weird. It's like sometimes stuff just doesn't make it over sometimes. All right, yep. I don't know if we're going to have a concise answer. I think we've kind of kicked this one around a little bit, but maybe you have something, or maybe somebody can suggest something. So this comes in from Patuk. It says, hi, in my latest quest to go it alone, I'm trying to migrate my domain off of Google Apps to my own VPS. I'm thinking of deploying Postfix on a VPS for mail and have it fall back to a caching server on a Raspberry Pi I have hosted for free. I'm not sure how to best handle contacts, as there are a bunch of solutions out there which do card DAV, but don't know what's the best option. My requirements are that I could sync with an Android device and have it hopefully be reasonably secure, like SSL, and with an encrypted database if possible. So should I be using something like Colab, which does it all? I fear that there would be a learning curve that I miss during the pre-configuration. So out-of-box software, I'd like to know what's going on behind the scenes. Could you guys point me in the right direction? I'd love to get contact syncing before I play with the mail solution, as mail is more critical to me than my contacts. Thanks for the help.
I've only ever looked at using LDAP to store contacts, and I know that works in Thunderbird, but I've never looked at if that would work with my phone or not.
Yeah, see, this is like he mentions Colab. Of course, I always mention Zimbra too. I don't know. One I'm still planning to. I used it years ago, and it was good for that. But the one solution the subreddit had was OwnCloud.
Does it have a contact thing?
Yeah, it does now.
Cool.
The problem is I feel like it'd be not. OwnCloud is really good and it's on a really good trajectory, so it's only going to just really keep getting better. But God, it would be so nice if it's something that's been around for a really long time and done that, or even just straight up did the Exchange active sync type.
Right. Or LDAP was specifically designed to keep track of contacts, right? That's the whole point. It's a directory service.
I wonder.
I don't. Do phones support it? I think so. And you can definitely do LDAP over SSL.
Well, what I'm wondering
now, when he says an encrypted database, that's hard. Like encrypted how?
Well, he definitely wants SSL for that.
Right. Yes. You definitely want transport encryption, right? So that this people can't listen in while it's going back and forth between the server and your phone.
Well, here's
but if you want the database on it's a little more.
This could maybe bridge the gap. Contacts to LDAP. There's a couple of Android apps here. One's called LDAP Sync, And I mean, it looks old, so you might not want to go with this
well,
one.
I guess it's gonna pull the LDAP stuff into your like Android contacts list.
You put in the host, and it looks like this one supports encrypted connections. You give it the DN, and then it looks like it'll go down there and pull it down. And you can also enable sync, so it'll do. I mean, that one looks old, but there's a couple of options in here. So like Contacts LDAP actually looks reasonably nice. This one even supports like pictures and stuff.
Right. I was wondering like if the native mail client supported, but I guess on Android they're gonna hook into the Android contact list rather than.
Yeah, it looks like this one I'm looking at lets you import it right to the phone contacts. So that's that. You know, I don't know. Maybe OwnCloud's a better way to go.
Right. Like, I guess it depends. In my use case, I would need it on my desktop because that's where I'm going to be sending emails a lot. On my phone, yeah, and Thunderbird does LDAP. On my phone, I'm usually only ever either replying to an email or manually sending an email to a person that one of a very small set of people that I know, and I would know their email address off the top of my head, or just it would be in my recently used email list, right?
Mm-hmm. Good one. Well, if you have a suggestion.
Send them emails. But yeah, it would be, I see somebody linked CardDAV Sync.
There you go.
Google Play.
Yep. That would probably be how you do it from OwnCloud, I bet.
You
could just run a CardDAV server.
Integrate with. The advantage with something like LDAP is it can integrate with whatever else you already had, or if you already have a contact list somewhere, is probably using something like LDAP, which Active Directory is just a modified version of LDAP.
iOS could probably be a whole other story. I don't know. Actually, I think iOS lets you touch the address book, so maybe actually they would have something.
I'm not sure.
But if you out there have a suggestion,
with phone stuff.
I know.
I use my cell phone to make phone calls sometimes.
I actually my address book is kind of a loss. I kind of just go by my recent contacts. That's kind of I don't like to use the phone
my address book. Admittedly, I guess it syncs from Google now.
Yeah.
Mostly because when I had the Windows Phone, it had Google had that service where they emulated an Exchange server.
Right.
And so when I was moving phones, it was literally I pushed the contacts up from my Windows Phone to Google and then pulled them down onto my end.
Yeah.
And it was also just easier when I have to bulk add contacts or something. I can just sit on my computer and hammer them in. It's so much faster than I could try to type people in my phone.
Well, I'd love to hear what you guys have done, because this is something I need to do here at JBHQ. So email us in, TechSNAP@JupiterBroadcasting.com, or pop that contact link at the top of our website. Or if you got a question or story.
It was a Reddit, so if you want to just reply directly on the Reddit, that works too.
That works too. Yep, absolutely. You can find the link in the feedback section of our show notes. All right, Alan, with the feedback all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite fit up at the top of the show, but we still want to go over them, give you some links to follow up on your own after the show. And some of these links even came from our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Mr. Jude, the first one is not a good story for JP Morgan. JP Morgan's website exposed data for 465,000 cardholders. They issued, by the way, this was back in July. I guess that's probably a good disclaimer to make too. But we got gosh. Look at this, Alan. Look at this.
But, I guess they were just disclosing it now because the news story is new.
Right. Wednesday, the warning came out on Wednesday after investigators were unable to rule out the possibility that some personal data may have been stolen from about their customers. So they hadn't said anything. They didn't say anything publicly because they hadn't confirmed with absolute certainty that public data hadn't been leaked. Now, I wonder what that means exactly.
So basically, they weren't able to prove that it wasn't stolen. So we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
If a company is doing security properly, as soon as the breach is, they will say, we can't prove it didn't happen, so we're taking these safeguard steps. At JP Morgan, they're like, we're going to try really hard to prove it, and then months and months later, if we still can't be sure, then we'll disclose it.
That's exactly what happened.
And so now, if anybody's stuff was stolen, it's already been used. But they should have had to disclose the hack when it happened. Months ago.
Good news, Alan. You're going to get a year free of credit monitoring from JP Morgan. So
right.
That makes it better. Yeah.
From Experian, I bet, right?
So they were hacked in July. They discovered it in September.
Yeah. And then they told us about it in December.
And the site that was in use was ucard.chase.com. So it's actually Chase customers.
And the worst thing is, in this particular case, it was cards issued on behalf of corporations and government agencies.
Yep.
And specifically, these were ones used to pay employees. So instead of getting a paycheck, you would get a card that your paycheck would just be added to the balance every month. or to be used to issue tax refunds or unemployment compensation and things like that. So these are those stored value cards. So they don't have quite the same fraud protection you get from an actual credit card.
Now, this next story is actually like directly out of the Kaspersky forum. And is this about, is this the Brazilian ISP story?
Yes. So they've, a bunch of people on the Kaspersky forum were saying that whenever they went to websites, they were getting these pop-ups saying that their flash needed to be updated or something, and it was pointing to malware. And it turns out a bunch of them found that it was only happening on sites that had Google Analytics. And they were like, we're pretty sure it wasn't Google that got hacked. Turns out what it appears to have been is a DNS poisoning attack or somebody hacking the DNS server, the recursive DNS server or something at a Brazilian ISP and making the website google-something.com, wherever Google Analytics .javascript loads from. So it would be pointing somewhere else and loading maliciously. It seems Google doesn't use SSL for everything, especially if the site that you're on isn't using SSL. Right, so like if the site you're visiting is SSL, Google Analytics loads over SSL to avoid that the error. But if the site isn't SSL, Google doesn't always use SSL, and so they were susceptible to this DNS hijack.
Now that's bad news, but the next story is nothing but good news. Finally, hallelujah! The next generation USB connector will go both ways. It'll be reversible.
Yes, so the USB 3.1 connector will go in normally or upside down. No more fiddling to get it the right way up. You know, the original like USB-A connector, I can see how that was a problem because you couldn't really tell without really looking closely which way it goes up. With like the micro USB on your phone, you know, they have that trapezoid shape so that it was easy to tell which way. So it's less of an issue. But so the USB 3.1 connector is going to be square and even smaller than micro USB.
Whoa. I hope it doesn't get more delicate because that's my only complaint right now with micros.
Probably.
I always feel like I'm going to break it when I'm plugging it in. Now, the Nexus 5 actually has a really good plug, but on the HTC One, I'm always like,
because, and they want it to be able to do, it's going to be really high bandwidth so that you'll be able to do video and stuff over it as well.
Oh, nice.
But basically, they're going to have to make adapters because it's going to be an entirely new connector that's not backwards compatible yet again.
I was actually kind of happy that 2 and 3 held compatibility together. I'll give it to them. 3 generations, I'll give it to them. All right, a few thoughts coming here.
So there'll be an there'll be an adapter, and it'll still technically be backwards compatible with like USB 2.0 and stuff.
On the few thoughts on,
I guess the one other feature it's going to have is the more negotiation protocol for faster charging.
Oh, good. I was going to ask. Good, yeah, because right now it's kind of balls. Yeah, it is kind of balls. Let's talk about how the NSA breaks SSL, Alan.
Well, this sounds like might. I think This is from cryptographyengineering.com, and they talk about the different parts of SSL and where the NSA may be doing different things to break it.
Right.
You know, and mostly they go after the general points that rather than spend all kinds of time and computers and money and so on trying to break the encryption, when you can just go to the website that you want, use a subpoena to make them give you their private key, and then put them under a gag order so they can't tell anybody.
Right.
And then you can just decrypt all the traffic. So why break SSL when you can just go around it? And it talks about a bunch of the other different things and like hacking RC4 and replacing it and all that stuff. So if you're interested in that, it's a good read.
The next story is actually coming from the Microsoft blog. I don't know. It sounds like kind of like, hey, us too. Because remember, Google's come out and said this. But Microsoft announced they'll be encrypting connections between their data centers now. Did you also read that they talked something about they're going to increase their code transparency?
Yeah, they were very vague about it.
Yeah.
Which is like the opposite of transparency.
Exactly. Increasing transparency. So just as we've called for governments to become more transparent about the issues, we believe it's appropriate for us to be more transparent ourselves. We'll therefore be taking additional steps to increase transparency by building our long-term standing program that provides government customers with the opportunity and ability to review source code, reassure themselves of integrity, and confirm there are no back doors.
So it's basically under an NDA, Microsoft will let you look at their code.
Right.
If you're a government. This is probably mostly in an effort to get, say, the British government not to assume that Microsoft code is full of NSA backdoors.
We'll open these centers in Europe, the Americas, and Asia, and will further extend the range of products included in these programs.
The real question is, unless Microsoft is allowing you to compile it from the source code you read, how can you know that they didn't just compile a slightly different version of the source code and then give you the executable?
And
right?
what kind of? I mean, I bet there are software engineers that have worked in the Windows department for almost their entire careers that could barely parse through. From what I have heard, that is like navigating the thickest jungle you've ever seen.
Right. This is mostly about, saying that you did something to make people feel
it does seem like an open acknowledgement, but it does feel like an open acknowledgement of the advantages that open source has in highly critical, highly secure areas. I mean, I compliment Microsoft on being willing to do this, but I kind of feel like it's not nearly enough. Well,
right.
Whatever.
Yep.
They obviously are feeling the pressure to some extent.
Yep.
All right.
So the next one comes from Afrinik, and it's a paper describing Dane, which we've kind of touched on before, but the basic idea is now that we have DNSSEC, which is basically cryptographically signed DNS records, you can use that to say, this is the public key of the certificate that's allowed for this website. So instead of having to use a certificate authority, you could self-sign a certificate and then through DNS publish that this is the right certificate. And that way when people go to the website, they can trust your SSL certificate without having to use the certificate authority.
Nice.
Because they know it's the guy who owns the domain because the record's in DNS and that record has been cryptographically signed. The issue with that is it moves the security impetus from the certificate authorities, which while they don't have a 100% security record, they've been doing it for a long time, to the domain registrars,
right,
who haven't necessarily had to do that much security stuff before. And as we've seen in the recent couple of months, we had a couple of them get hacked and people's domains get hijacked, right? The Syrian Electronic Army changed a bunch of people's, who is like Twitter. They hijacked Twitter's DNS.
It's almost like we need some sort of shared blockchain of record.
Not quite, but what they're looking at here is actually combining the two.
Yeah.
So you use the existing certificate authority system, and you know how we've talked about like Google Chrome pinning Google certificates in Chrome, so that it knows that this is the right certificate from Google if it sees another one that's fake, even if the certificate looks legitimate. Mm-hmm. Well, if you could publish in DNS with the Dane record saying this is the public key of our website, and it's a legitimate CA certificate, it would allow you as like a double check that it's not the wrong SSL certificate. It basically allow you in DNS to also pin your SSL certificate, so that if someone hacks a certificate authority again, or some government makes a certificate authority issue a certificate for your domain, so they can do a man-in-the-middle attack on you. If you've pinned it in DNS, then you can check for that.
Right.
Although if it's the government, they could probably go to your DNS registrar and get your key to sign with, screw with your DNS as well. But
I suppose so.
Every step you add makes it less likely that this will happen.
Yeah, it seems like a nice improvement.
You noticing.
Yeah.
So the paper digs into it a bit more, and it's got some cool graphics and stuff. And if you're interested in that, it's quite interesting. But they were also talking about democratizing it, right? If you can remove the certificate authorities from it, you can allow people to...
That's a big point for me.
To build this trust model using the regular DNS stuff where you're not having to pay a certificate authority a bunch of money.
Right. All right, interesting. Now, this next story, it makes my heart hurt for things like Handbrake and VLC. This was a court ruling. An open source project can be liable for third-party DRM busting code. For example, one of the most popular multi-purpose downloading tools on the web today is JDownloader, a Java-based tool compatible with Windows, Linux, and Macs. The software is able to download video files from file hosting sites and extract all of them once completed. And I guess one of the ways it does this is by not violating, I guess probably isn't the right way to put it, but it works around some password sites and encryption. And I guess the court, this was a German court, said that the open source project itself could be held liable for that.
That's kind of ridiculous. It's like, it'd be like trying to sue the developers of wget because somebody used wget to download a file from your website without your permission.
The makers of JDownloader said that this is worrisome, that it sets a bad precedent.
Yes.
Yeah. AppWork informed TorrentFrink that the judgment will be a burden on the open source creative process. Wow. I mean, I think of, like, for example, VLC, which has the capability of playing Blu-rays. I don't know how they're doing that. Is that?
Yep. Well, even technically using X264, right? That's they're not paying the patent license to do H.264.
Right.
Right? They're doing their own thing that's compatible or whatever.
Yeah.
And
all right, well, let's talk about the gentle art of
But I guess the worst one is not when the open source project JDownloader wasn't really designed for you to violate copyrights or something.
But it supports plugins, and then you can add...
And then somebody can add a plugin. So somebody used my thing as the base. It's like, it'd be the equivalent of suing the gun manufacturer because somebody shot you, or something, or a car manufacturer because you got hit by a car.
Right.
It's like the car manufacturer wasn't driving.
Right. All right, now let's talk about the gentle art of cracking passwords. And it's gentle because it has a picture of a kitty.
Mm-hmm. And then it has a picture of an old CPU further down.
Oh, yeah, it sure does.
Random clip art.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a BBC article about why people pick bad passwords.
Oh, really?
And apparently, they had some ridiculous statistics about how gingers pick better passwords or something.
Oh, you got to be kidding me. Let's see here.
Yeah.
In some cases, up to... Okay, so the basis of is most noticeable when it comes to the numbers of people who pick when told to choose a 4-digit PIN. Analysts of the choices suggest that people drift towards a small subset of 10,000 available. In some cases, up to 80% of choices come from the just first 100 different numbers.
Yeah, so if you did, the chart of what are the most popular 4-digit PINs, 80% of people pick one in the top 100 most popular ones instead of something kind of random. So, even with 10,000 possibilities, most people pick from the same 100. But yeah, the stat I was talking about is that the study suggests that red-haired women tend to choose the best passwords and men with bushy beards and unkempt hair pick the worst, which I think is got to be wrong. Like, they're looking at the wrong kind of men with bushy beards.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, the bushy beard guys I know probably have some of the best passwords.
Exactly. I guess, the beard doesn't make the man.
Now, this next story got a little bit of attention over the weekend, so it makes me smile.
Right, well, if you remember, I broke this story a while ago based on an anecdote from EuroBSDCon in Malta over the summer.
Oh, my goodness, Alan. So for nearly 2 decades, the nuclear launch codes at all Minuteman silos were in the United States was 00000000.
0. 8 zeros.
0. And well,
that's
that's not too bad. Let's see, the Enterprise destruct code was 01 destruct 01 or something like that. Now, this wouldn't actually arm the warhead. That's the caveat of the story. Is it would?
I forget the exact details.
It was a launch code, not an ARM code. But I could see it. I see the logic. Like, the Russians have launched.
All it would take was the launch, even an unarmed missile.
Right. Oh, for sure.
The Russians to counter launch.
And you got to figure, like, they didn't want to have, like, all of this military machine all ready to go and then have the one thing that holds us up be the launch code. That must have been it, right? That had to be the logic. Like, well, when it comes down to it, we can't be waiting on that.
Yeah, we can't. We don't want somebody to have forgotten the password at the critical moment.
Right, and worst case scenario is we accidentally launch a missile at the Ruskies. Not so bad.
Right. But one of the biggest things, if you really read into that story, is how much more control the military had and how much they didn't want to rely on the president necessarily.
Yeah, interesting. And in fact, wasn't the use of a passcode mandated by JFK, and that they kind of resisted that, I think? So it says here, the devices were supposed to be fitted for the passcode on every nuclear missile. After JFK issued a memorandum, the military continued to drag its heels on the matter. In fact, it was noted that a full 20 years after JFK had ordered the PLAs to be fitted on every nuclear device, half of the missiles in Europe were still protected by simple mechanical locks. Most of them did not have the new system in place and weren't even activated until 1977. That's something. That's crazy. All right, Alan, we got one here from Krebs on Security. Simple but effective point-and-sale skimmer. Oh, good. I've been needing one of these. That's nice. Oh, they got a video of it, too.
So basically they made it look like the front of the original device and kind of snap it over it. And so even if you looked at the device every day, you might not notice that all of a sudden there was a skimmer attached over top of it.
Boy, it sure does just look like a regular old everyday device.
Really, but when they take it apart.
Yeah, I see that. Oh, that's clever. It's got like a faceplate on top of it. That is so tricky. Well, Bitcoin. I don't know. How about what about Square? I don't know. There's lots of I don't know what the solution is to this because it just seems like these cards are vulnerable to this kind of scam.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we got to wrap up the roundup with an SSD story, of course, and this one probably I think you saw coming. SSD manufacturer OCZ is preparing for bankruptcy. The OCZ manufacturer of solid-state drives will file for bankruptcy. The move is being forced by Hercules Technology Growth Capital, which had lent $30 million to OCZ under terms that were later breached. Ouch.
Yeah. So it seems a little weird that a company that the OCZ seemed fairly big and they made a lot of different products and stuff, and they seemed to have decent sales, that they couldn't pay back the $30 million they borrowed. But I guess, the margin on this stuff was pretty thin, and, they're trying to sell. They were known for like the cheapest SSDs, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it says here that their IP and assets will be sold to Toshiba, including the controller that people like from OCZ. Oh. Yeah. So Toshiba's going to get a boost in their SSD business.
Well, and I think part of the problem OCZ had was that their Vertex 3 line had some issues.
Yeah.
Where it would hang and stuff, and I have a Vertex 2 in my current machine, and it's just not that fast.
I just when I don't think of a great reputation when I think of them, and I can't place it on anyone.
Right. In general, they were people used them because it was the cheapest SSD.
Because Intel charges too much.
But for my new machine, I broke down and bought a pair of Intel 530s.
Yeah. I mean, when it's a rig that I really care about, I go
more money, but
yeah, but I put Intel SSDs in them when it's one that I really care about. Generally. That's not all my machines. Like I have like a banger machine.
Sometimes you can't afford.
Yeah. Or like, man, there was a good Black Friday deal Amazon had.
Oh yeah, that's where I got my 530s.
Yeah. Oh, good. You see, by the time I got there, all they had left was the 240s. So I picked up a 240 for.
Well, sorry, it's the Intel.
Oh, the number. I meant the storage.
240 gig. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I bought the 240 as well. The other ones were too expensive.
I know, but it was still a pretty good deal. All right, Alan. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this week's TechSNAP.
It does.
Boom. All right. Well, very good. We'd love to have you join us live like these yahoos have here in the chat room. We do this show live on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2100 UTC.
Pow. We also stream the audio over at jblive.info. If you're sitting at your desk, if you're on your car, we've got two different audio streams, a higher bitrate and a lower bitrate. You can listen there. Or, of course, just download the show later on. It's always out Thursday evenings, Friday mornings. And if you listen in like a podcast directory like Stitcher, TechSNAP is there now. And also in iTunes, we would appreciate a comment or rating in either location. In fact, I think almost all of the Jupiter Broadcasting shows are in Stitcher now if you are a Stitcher radio listener. All right, Alan, we'll have a great week. We'll see you next Thursday, okay?
Yep.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.